All right, we have two images here from Dominic. The first image, you're at ISO 100, 1/80th of a second at f1.4. So if you're in need of light, shooting with a wider aperture makes sense, but I would encourage you in this situation to set up on a tripod, have more depth of field, shoot this at like f16 or 18 or 22, and then just have a longer shutter speed to allow that light in. Sometimes places are weird, like airports, and you can't set up a tripod, so that could have been problematic here. But overall, this is a really beautiful image for form. We're looking at the airport. We see the gates listed up here, but just the repetition of the top of the building, the sides of the wall, that repetition is really beautiful. Waiting until this woman with her bright yellow hat is out of the scene, I think could work better to make it more formal and less about narrative. But overall, this is a nice formal image. I really enjoy these people on the sides as they're just sitting there separated with their luggage and legs sitting out. And even this doesn't bother me as far as the formal quality, but this starts to add more of a narrative that I think is a distraction. But this image is all about narrative. This is great. So you had said that you're into fighting. So we have this guy kind of taking a knee, having his hand raised above him with the flag behind him. So has a lot of meaning, especially right now with all the social injustice that we're seeing. So this is a beautiful image. Having his gloves on the side is always taking time before a fight to recognize what's going on. So really beautiful. The flag above him, I think, is really symbolic. And then having this as a frame within a frame as we're looking through, I mean, I don't really know how all this fighting works, and I don't see this in the background, but it looks like this would be like the cage that you'd be fighting in. So maybe it's just different types of fighting, and this is separated from that. But creating that frame within a frame is working really well. My only critique would be to add a little bit more space so we're able to see that full flag, if that's important to the narrative of the image, and I feel like it is. Actually, let me look at your settings on that really quick. So you're at f4, 1/6 of a second, but everything's nice and still, ISO 200. That's looking good. Okay. Okay, so you took a lot of different shots of him. Him fighting, I think that makes sense. That's what we expect to see. So him with his hand raised, I think is a much stronger narrative for us to have, especially with the flag in the background. So combining that here with him cropped at the bottom, that doesn't work. Here having some space around him works. But I really like his gloves to the side because that shows that this is a moment of rest, not that he's like a champion there, right? This is more of a moment of rest before things are happening, or that's how I'm reading it at least. So I think that that's really beautiful. Here we have your dog who's adorable, but there's a pretty strong color cast there. I don't think those are working quite as well. This image has a strong narrative, right? These guys all fighting together. And then your airport image that you turned in, I think, is much stronger than any of these. So nice job on your edit. This is a maybe equally strong image for different reasons. All right, so now we're looking at Marcus's image of his dog, Kobe. You're at ISO 2000, so really high ISO there. We'll take a look at this closer and see if we're seeing digital noise there. F7.1 at 1/1250th of a second. So those settings all look fine, except for that ISO. So let's take a look. Yeah, so we're getting a little bit of digital noise in the background. What are you shooting with? A 5300. A little bit of digital noise, you can see that up here. It's just not a smooth gradient. That's that digital noise. There's a lot of texture in this image, so there might be more digital noise than we're even realizing. But here you got nice and low, and you have a picture of your dog. Now, this works for a formal image in the sense that we're just seeing the dog as a animal. We're not seeing it as a playful companion for you. But I think what could work better is to have more of an abstracted image of him, like getting really close and showing us just the fur and the way his muscles are on his back. I think that could be really interesting. And if you have questions about what exactly I mean by that, by kind of abstracting his body, I could for sure show you some images like that. And then here, this is a really strong narrative, right? Having the ball right in front of you, having the dog out of focus in the background, lets us know something's going to happen as his ears are always up, but his ears are so attentive, his tongue's out, he looks like he's ready to go. And then we see this great big field back behind him. So we know this is like playtime's about to happen. So this is a really fun example of narrative, a really strong image for narrative. Let's look at your settings there. Oh, you're at 7.1. You're at the same settings for both of those. So that's a bit concerning to me because I want to make sure students are adjusting their shutter speed and aperture for each image. Now, this is a good example of how having your subject that you're focused on closer to the lens allows the background to fall out of focus, because in this look like they're shot with different apertures. What's your focal length on them? Yeah, it's the same. But by focusing closer to the lens, the background falls out of focus. But I'd like to see that you're making some of these adjustments on your own, that you're not just shooting with the same shutter speed and aperture. So just be aware of that. It's not a big deal right now, but it's something that I want you to be aware of. Yeah, these all come across more strongly as narrative instead of formal. So something for you to keep in mind. The images with him out of focus work much better than him in focus. I think that was a really smart decision to choose that image. All right, and then we have Josiah's images here. You're at ISO, I just lost it. You're at ISO 3200, so really high ISO, f22 at 1/125th of a second. So f22 is going to give you the most amount of depth of field in your image, but this image is totally still. So you can keep that depth of field if you want that at 22, but set up on a tripod and bring your shutter speed down, have a much longer shutter speed. That will allow you to have a lower ISO. So as you go out, I want you to set your ISO first. And we want to keep that between, especially with your camera, between 100 and 400. We don't want to raise it more than that. So bring your ISO down, then you go out to shoot. You make your decision. Is your main interest in your image to have it still and sharp, or is your main interest to have the most depth of field or shallow depth of field? You have to pick one of those variables as your most important one, and then the other variable will just fall into place. So here, if you set your ISO low at 400, you wanted a lot of depth of field, so you kept this at f22. Then your shutter speed would fall where it will, and that would probably be, I don't know, like 1/5 of a second or something. It would be a really long exposure. And if you're set up on a tripod, that's totally fine. There's no issue with that. Everything's still in this image. This image actually doesn't look totally sharp as we move into the background. It looks like maybe you focused further forward in the image. This starts to fall. This is what you say is the most important aspect of the image, this pole, and it's not totally in focus there. So that's something for you to be aware of. But this is a formal image. There's nothing narrative about this image. Then we move here, and this has more of a narrative to it. There's like a building, a shed that it looks like it's been like blown down or pushed over or something. So this is creating more of a narrative. Your settings here are f16, 1/125th of a second at ISO 3200. So again, you want to keep that ISO low. And if we want to look at what happens when we have the higher ISO, you can see that like digital noise, like in this area, you see how there's like green and red speckles in this area? That's that digital noise, and that's what's going to happen when you have a higher ISO. So that's why we want to bring that down. Doesn't look like you turned in a contact sheet, so make sure that you turn those in because that's 10% of your grade.